Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a critical strategic briefing: how real estate can not just survive, but actually thrive in a changing climate. If you own, manage, or invest in property, well, the weather isn't just small talk anymore, is it? It's become a fundamental make or break variable in your long-term valuations.
So let's just ask the big question right up front. What actually happens when your real estate sits directly in the path of climate change? We are talking about the critical intersection where extreme weather events crash right into long-term property valuation. It's no longer just about assessing the bricks and mortar of a building, right? It's about understanding how shifting climate patterns over the next few decades are going to aggressively test the financial resilience of entire asset portfolios. Okay, let's dive into this. To truly understand how the industry systematically measures these exact climate risks, we've got to look directly at the SASB standards for the real estate sector. These standards, which are now part of the IFRS Foundation, provide this incredibly rigorous framework that real estate entities use to track, measure, and disclose sustainability risks. It's basically the gold standard for figuring out what physical climate threats actually mean for your balance sheet.
To give you a clear roadmap for our masterclass today, here is the agenda. We'll kick things off with 1. The climate risk reality, then move into 2. Defining the flood zone. Next, we'll cover 3. Analyzing systematic risk exposure. Weigh our 4. Alleviation versus adaptation strategies. And finally, bring the whole shebang together with 5. Protecting long-term value.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the climate risk reality, assessing the physical threat. And this brilliantly illustrates what we're up against. According to the SASB standard, it's not just about a single bad storm hitting a building. We're looking at a massive, tangled web of impacts. Sure, you have the immediate shock of extreme weather, but it's also evolving legislation and building codes, severe regional infrastructure disruptions, sudden shifts in what tenants actually demand, critical constraints on water availability, and broader ripple effects on local economies. The physical risk literally ripples outward, touching absolutely every single aspect of a property's viability. Which brings us to a super vital distinction that frames our entire explainer today: physical risk versus financial risk. It is absolutely crucial to differentiate between the physical threat to the asset itself, like, say, floodwater pouring into a pristine lobby, and the financial threat to the balance sheet, like soaring insurance premiums or a sudden, nasty drop in asset liquidity. Ultimately, if we want to protect capital, we have to zero in on the risks and opportunities most likely to impact actual financial value.
Moving on to Section 2, defining the flood zone, where the risks actually lie. So the crucial point here is demystifying this whole 100-year flood zone concept. It's totally foundational. The standard simply defines these as land areas subject to a 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. This captures your coastal floodplains, areas along major rivers, and even low-lying urban spots subject to heavy ponding. It's the baseline metric you absolutely need for assessing any property's climate vulnerability.
I really want to pause on this number for a second, 1%. Because honestly, the term 100-year flood can be incredibly misleading. People hear that and think, oh, a flood happens once a century? I'm safe for the next 99 years. No way. It represents a persistent 1% annual statistical probability of flooding every single year. To put that into perspective, over the course of a standard 30-year commercial mortgage, that 1% annual chance compounds massively. It makes it a very real, very immediate threat to property investors. Let's look at Section 3, analyzing systematic risk exposure and measuring the impact.
To properly assess this exposure, entities have to systematically disclose the total leasable floor area of their properties sitting in these 100-year flood zones. But, and this is a big but, they don't just dump a single unhelpful lump sum on us. They have to break this data down by property sector, like residential versus retail, and by geographic region. This level of granularity is a total game changer. It highlights systemic vulnerabilities within a portfolio, letting analysts see exactly which sectors and which specific locations carry the heaviest flood risk burden. Now, what's really interesting about this is a hidden, evolving danger we absolutely have to account for: the threat of flood zone reclassification. Climate patterns are actively changing, which means the maps are changing. Entities need to disclose their risk perception and the potential impacts of 100-year flood zones expanding into real estate that was previously considered perfectly safe. Yesterday's dry prime real estate could literally be tomorrow's high-risk floodplain, and that reclassification instantly tanks a property's value.
Shifting gears to Section 4, Alleviation versus Adaptation Strategies, our ultimate risk playbook. The standard outlines two distinct approaches here. On one side, we have alleviation strategies. This is fundamentally about shifting the financial risk away from the owner. You're talking about utilizing property and flood insurance, or maybe tweaking lease structures and durations to transfer some of that burden over to the tenants. On the flip side, you have adaptation strategies. This is about actively mitigating the risk by improving the property itself, making hard, tangible investments in physical asset resiliency and building out robust operational contingency plans. Now, while alleviation tactics are super common, relying solely on them brings some serious long-term financial headaches. If your only move is buying insurance, you are completely exposed to endlessly rising property insurance rates. Plus, the standards point out growing, very real concerns about the long-term stability of government-subsidized flood insurance programs. And yeah, shifting risk to tenants through lease terms might protect a landlord on a spreadsheet today, but it can make that property way less competitive in the open market down the road. Alleviation isn't a cure, it's just a temporary financial buffer. Let's move to adaptation and see how this builds into a much more permanent solution. Portfolio managers have to take proactive steps. Step 1 is a rigorous assessment of physical asset vulnerability under very specific climate scenarios. Step 2 is putting actual capital to work. We're talking investing in physical asset resiliency, maybe elevating your critical mechanical systems above ground level or installing advanced flood dates. Step 3 is developing robust contingency plans so that when the weather does turn nasty, your operational downtime and tenant disruption are kept to an absolute minima. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Protecting Long-Term Value, the Strategic Imperative. Because, let's be honest, to ensure long-term growth, entities can't just blindly throw money at a problem. You have to carefully account for mitigation trade-offs. The SASB standards highlight how absolutely essential it is to weigh comprehensive adaptation strategies against all projected costs and benefits over the long haul. Is it more cost-effective to just eat higher insurance premiums today, or do you drop millions on physical seawalls for tomorrow? These are the brutal, real-world financial trade-offs portfolio managers have to navigate every single day to protect their cash flows and maintain access to capital. I actually want to read this crucial quote directly from the source material because it really underscores the absolute urgency here. It states, "These strategies are especially important considering financing stipulations or other creditor concerns." Think about that. This isn't just about good PR or environmental awareness. This mandate is coming straight from the lenders. Creditors are scrutinizing climate risks right now as we speak. If your assets are exposed and unprepared, your access to affordable financing could literally just evaporate overnight. So what does this all mean? It leads us to one final, incredibly provocative question. Is your real estate portfolio truly prepared for the next decade of climate volatility? Understanding your systematic exposure and perfectly balancing your alleviation and adaptation strategies, that's not some far-off future scenario. It is a current strategic imperative. The water is rising, folks, both literally and financially. It's time to seriously evaluate your assets before the market or the weather decides to do it for you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.